And um, good.
Okay,
So,
that works for me.
yeah, why don't we'll get started. It's 12:01. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the FDU Rothman Institute Zoom at Noon program. I think today we will hear some really, really interesting stuff. I can almost promise that everybody is going to learn something in our discussion today, looking at some of the compliance and pandemic policy issues that are facing all of us. And we get a lot of questions. You know, what do you do now? What's changing? What's going on? And so we're honored to have Joseph Maddaloni, a very influential attorney. Can I say that, Joseph?
You may be the only one that does, but yes, go ahead.
So again, my name is Dale Caldwell, Dr. Dale Caldwell. I'm the executive director of the Rothman Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Fairleigh Dickinson University. Sue Slavin and Maura Panuski are part of our team. They're on the show. I don't know if we have other members of our team here. And our focus is really to promote, support, and research veteran entrepreneurship, family business entrepreneurship, student entrepreneurship, urban entrepreneurship. We really are passionate about the entrepreneurship in every form possible. And so we try to bring some experts like Joseph to really come and provide some real information that you can use in the field as you're doing your work, or you can advise your clients about. So with that, Joseph, did you want to say, I know we have some slides with a lot of information on them, and we can share those if people want, but just say a little bit about yourself. Now, where did you grow up, and how did you get into law?
Okay, well, I just put up the slide that generally gives my legal background and what I concentrate in. But my path of law was quite interesting. I am what is commonly referred to in the legal business as a retread. Law was a second career for me. I didn't go to law school until I was 29 years old and had been out of college and graduate school for a number of years. I went to the University of Delaware and got an undergraduate degree, and then got a graduate degree from there in public administration.
Okay.
After which I went to work for a number of governmental units, state, local, county, and in that capacity, I did a lot of labor and employment work. I negotiated labor contracts for all levels of municipal services, police, fire, nurses, school teachers. So I had a real, very extensive background in labor and employment through my work in governmental entities. And then through that process, I just got an interest in learning more about the law. So the time was right. I took the law school entrance exam and decided to apply to law school, and got into Seton Hall Law School. I went to Seton Hall Law School in the evenings. Back then, they had an evening program where you could go to school at night. And since I had already been out on my own for a while, I had all of the obligations that a young professional would have: rent, car payments, electric bills, and all that stuff. So I had to continue working while I went to law school. It took me 4 years to get through law school in the evening program. And I graduated when I was 33 and passed the bar exam, and been practicing law ever since. Wonderful. So it wasn't a first career for me, but it certainly has been a long and rewarding one.
Well, I mentioned a friend of mine, Joey Novick, who's a professional comedian, went to Seton Hall Law School at 51.
Yeah, right.
So Seton Hall seems to do a good job with that. And I got my doctorate from there at an age, I won't say what age, but an older age. So
yeah, and one of the interesting things about the program, the evening program, was it was populated with a lot of folks like myself who were switching careers. And some were, at or about the same age group that I was, and there were those who were older than I was, that had PhDs and their doctorates, and had been working in other fields, and decided to go back to school and get a law degree. So that made it kind of interesting, because the class was very diverse. We had people there that had all different kinds of backgrounds and experiences. So some of the colloquy in the classes, talking about different legal issues became very interesting, as you saw people bring to the discussion their different life experiences. not only personally, but professionally. So it was really a great experience.
Well, that's a great message because I had the same. I was on the education side for the doctoral program, and that was the most wonderful because most of the people had life experiences in that discussion. So if anybody's out there that's thinking, maybe I'll go to law school, maybe I'll get my doctorate, don't throw that idea out. Think about it. It's never too late to do that.
It's never too late.
It's never too late. So I didn't think we'd be talking about that, but I love these things because we always go in other directions. So now you're at Schenck Price, and what's your focus area? What are you working on mostly there?
My focus here is primarily labor and employment
Okay.
law. So we represent the management in all phases of labor and employment. I also happen to be one of the few remaining traditional labor lawyers in the country. Traditional labor law, dealing with unions and unionization issues, it's kind of this almost the stepchild of the employment practice. Employment has grown to be mostly discrimination, wage and hour suits and stuff of that nature. Traditional labor is a very distinct type of practice exclusively before the either the National Labor Relations Board or any number of state equivalents. New Jersey has PERC, New York's got a PERB. So, a number of states have their own, state entities. But I am a seasoned traditional labor lawyer. As I just indicated, I did that even before I became a lawyer. I did a number of labor relations activities. So I spend my time dealing with, counseling employers, dealing with their issues. A lot of, especially in the last 2 years as we've been dealing with this pandemic, the counseling issues have become quite predominant. Folks are calling constantly, and as we'll hear, it's the perfect segue. As we'll hear, it's still it's a changing environment. It's constantly shifting, constantly moving. There's state and federal government are still interacting guidelines, removing guidelines. So it's been a very busy practice.
Wonderful. Now what's your next slide?
All right, so let's see. This is about the firm, and you're welcome to take a look at that at your convenience. So let's get started. All right, so we're talking about COVID compliance and pandemic issues, and the one thing that I think we all need to keep in mind, as I just kind of stated, is the state of it is still changing, it's fluctuating. We've gone from an environment where very early on we had some very drastic measures undertaken by governments, both the state and federal government, that included lockdowns, people staying home and whatnot. And over the last year and a half, as we've come out of that general lockdown mode, the government, both state and federal, have still been kind of maneuvering to maximize safety and assure that as we get back into what everyone references as the new normal, that we are still taking the necessary precautions to assure that we don't get a resurgence of the pandemic, and it doesn't come back as strong as it was when we first were starting to deal with it. So I wanted to talk about a couple of recent enactments at both the state and federal level, and we can try to figure out what's going on and what we can anticipate. So. The first one is the OSHA's emergency temporary standard and that is commonly referred to as an ETS on vaccination and testing. And then OSHA also recently issued an ETS on healthcare. All right, so the ETS on vaccination and testing is the one that has been in the news recently. It was advertised by or published by OSHA on November 4th or 5th. And the day after, it was challenged in court down in Texas. And the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals issued a stay and put an injunction against the ETS. That's the one that has relatively far-reaching consequences for employers. It applies to employers, all employers with 100 or more employees, and it establishes minimum and vaccination and a verification and testing requirements. So it also has face covering, testing requirements, all intended to reduce the exposure us to or transmission of COVID in the workplace. It is perhaps one of the most divisive pieces of workplace regulation to ever come out of OSHA or to ever come out of any state government for that matter. And it's not even so much that it's the reason it's divisive is because the issues become political. Yeah,
Right,
I mean,
right.
you know, I don't know if anybody, I have yet to meet anyone who is outright against vaccination, right? But what is the driving force against most of the opposition and the divisiveness is when you get down to mandating it or imposing certain requirements on folks in the workforce, as this ETS is seeking to do. So we don't know what the fate of it is. I'm going to suggest to you that I think it's likely that some portion of it or some aspect of it will be sustained and be, upheld by the courts. I think OSHA does have the authority to, that's OSHA's entire existence, is to implement regulations and guidelines for safety in the workplace. So, but this regulation has been challenged as being unconstitutional and exceeding the authority that the regulatory agency has. So we don't know what what the status of it is going to be until it makes its way through the courts. It will likely, predictably, it will wind up before the Supreme Court, and so we'll all have to wait and see what happens.
So let me ask you, and again, I don't want to get into the weeds because I'm not a lawyer and others, but the law that they're debating is it a law that constitutionally you can't mandate this, or just in simple and layman terms, what is the issue that they're debating?
Well, there's a couple of different challenges to it. All right, but the essential challenge is that the requirements of the ETS, the activities that and the conduct that it is imposing upon employers it exceeds the regulatory agency's authority, and therefore is unconstitutional or violates their statutory empowerment. All right, so that's the primary.
This doesn't impact state mandates. It's really just mandates on employers.
Correct.
Okay, which makes sense.
This would be a federal mandate. Now, again, understand the federal mandate, if it was to be sustained, impacts all the states.
Right.
Because the federal government, as we all know, is the highest level of authority. So anything that the federal government issues automatically affects all of the states.
Right.
Right. So that's why. Go ahead, Dale. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, no, sorry to interrupt, but so again, I guess one of the arguments would say, well, how do you pick 100? What's the science between 100, as opposed to 250 or 50, And so how do you impose it on some and not others? So again, I don't want to get into the lead, but I think people are trying to, are kind of, questioning. And is there precedent? Is there any kind of precedent where they've done anything like this before that you know of?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the precedent that has been discussed as it relates to all of these vaccination issues and whether the federal government can require them or not dates back to the 1920s when there was a pandemic of some sort, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was a mandated vaccination which went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled back then that the government had the authority under the circumstances to issue these mandatory, vaccination mandates. So that's the law that those in favor of these requirements are citing. Those in opposition are naturally trying to distinguish it based upon the time of, the events at the time. They're trying to challenge it based on the science, as you just indicated, for such things like what's so magical about 100 or more employees.
Right.
If you're looking to, really protect the workplace, So are you suggesting that employers that have less than 100 employees don't have to worry about safety? It's only 100 or more employees.
Right.
So those kind of issues are going to be played out in the courts as the Third Circuit Court of Appeals the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals and potentially the Supreme Court takes up this very, very controversial and divisive emergency temporary standard issued by OSHA. So now,
Yeah.
having said that, all right, and I get this question all the time from employers. Well, what should we be doing?
Mhm.
All right. I mean, should we be preparing to comply? Should we wait and see? And the answer to that very simply is it's up to you.
Mm.
Okay. Some employers have taken a more aggressive approach to dealing with these COVID related issues in their workplace. There's nothing prohibiting an employer, all right, from requiring employees be vaccinated, right, or requiring that they be vaccinated and otherwise will they be tested. All right. So employers right now have the authority or the ability to impose the same level of conduct or activity in their individual workplaces.
So let me ask you on that point, and sorry to interrupt you, but
No, let's go right ahead.
but on that point, so if I have 50 employees, do I have the authority to mandate that you get a vaccine or you're gone? Or do I have to allow for testing for those that don't believe in the vaccine?
No, employers can mandate that everyone be vaccinated or you don't have a job.
Or you're gone. Okay.
Right. Okay. Now, there are two exceptions to the vaccination requirements, and this is whether it's COVID vaccination, flu shots, whatever it may be. One is an exemption for religious beliefs,
Right.
and the second is a medically related exemption.
Right.
Okay. So by law, employees have the right to raise either of those as an exemption to an otherwise mandated vaccine requirement. But beyond those two exemptions, employers have the right to, it's already been determined, and employers do have the right to mandate the COVID vaccine.
So on that question, I happen to be pastor of a church too, and people have come to me for the exemption. But in New York, they don't take is it legal for someone not to take the religious exemption?
Well, that's a very, very interesting point. And I've seen even some of the mandates that are that have been talked about at the federal level, where they want to mandate these vaccines, where they seem to not want to recognize the religious or the medical exemptions. I think that's a clear violation of established law.
Yeah.
The law is very, very clear in this area that individuals have the right to raise an exemption for religious beliefs and an exemption for medical reasons. So when I get questioned about that, even from employers who are privately trying to figure out how they should react or respond, I stress upon them that they have to have a process in place where an employee who believes that he or she does have the basis on which to file for an exemption, there should be a process in place that allows the employee to do that. And then that request gets vetted pursuant to the established standards, and a decision is made as to whether the employee should be provided the exemption.
So someone's going to have a nice class action lawsuit, I think.
Absolutely. No question about it.
Yeah. Right. Interesting.
So anyway, to circle back, employers have the ability to impose these standards, even absent an OSHA regulation requiring them to do so. And it's really a matter of an employer's or a business's individual choice as to whether they want to do so. I have employers that I work with that are all over the boards. They go from doing nothing at this point to those who require you to be vaccinated to get into the building. They require everybody to come into the building to show proof of vaccination. So it runs the whole gamut, and we'll just have to wait and see whether this particular regulation gets sustained. If it does, then we'll all be subject to these requirements, but time will tell.
Interesting. And I suspect that a lot of it relates to how easy it is to get new employees. So a lot of the bigger companies seem to be having pretty strong mandates. Other companies that have trouble, getting people will probably be a little more lax.
Yeah, well, I mean, and again, it's a mixed bag. You hear about the airline industry where you've got, 500 pilots that are not going to be vaccinated, and so they're going to be let go. Or school teachers,
Right, right.
and so it really is. The consequences are significant with these requirements, and industries and individual employers, have to kind of contend with that. The more requirements or restrictions you put in place, the more you're likely going to not have the ability to attract or keep employees.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it's
so
the,
that's a trade-off.
excellent. The,
All right.
what else? What's next?
All
What's your
right.
next?
So OSHA also has recently enacted what is an emerging temporary standard that impacts healthcare. And this is only it's rather comprehensive. It requires any employer that meets the definition of healthcare or a healthcare employer, which is, it covers all of those employers that you would think would fit into that category, with some kind of outliers that may not necessarily be neatly in there, like home care agencies and stuff like that. But any employer that's in the healthcare business has to meet a pretty, it's a pretty significant set of standards and requirements. They have to develop an actually COVID-19 plan that addresses not only hazards in the workplace, but also has to be integrated with the plans of other facilities where your employees may actually go and perform services and potentially be exposed to COVID-19. So it is and the surprising thing is this was passed by OSHA, published on an emergency basis, and went into effect immediately, as they tried to do with the ETS we just talked about. And you didn't hear a word about it. There wasn't, there was no cry. Nobody went in to try and, force it or overturn it. But it does have a significant impact on those in the healthcare industry who have to comply. But those are the two most recent federal actions that have been undertaken to address this COVID situation. Okay.
Just before we move,
Sure.
so my mom's 86. She lives in my house with me here. She's on hospice, and so we have a hospice aide, and then I've hired another aide. Now they wear masks when they come in. Now, is the hospice agency liable if someone gets COVID and they come to my house, or?
Well, the hospice agency, if they meet the definition of healthcare provider, which they likely do,
Yeah.
then they have to have all of these protocols in place, which is intended to lessen the likelihood of transmission of COVID and provide them a basis on which to prevent potential liability if in fact they were to, God forbid, bring COVID into your mother's home.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So that's what this ETS is really trying to protect against.
Okay.
Is that situation where you've got employees who are in high risk situations and congregate health situations where they either pick up COVID and then bring it somewhere else, or take it from somewhere else and bring it to a different location.
Right.
And the ETS is just, it has every healthcare employer has to have a plan in place that addresses patient and non-employee screening and management requirements, physical distancing and barriers and personal protective equipment, cleaning and disinfection, ventilation, employee health screening and medical management, vaccination, training, anti-retaliation, record keeping, and reporting. It's a very, very complex and detailed set of requirements that they have to meet. So all of which, like I said, are intended to make sure the end user, if you will, the patient, right, has maximum protection against someone performing healthcare services from transmitting to them COVID-19. So your hospice agency should be following these protocols. The caregivers that show up should have personal protective equipment. Most of them are clearly wearing masks and gloves.
Right.
Some of them have shields. And they should be, who's ever sending them there should make sure that they either have a vaccination record or they've been tested. This is all required by the healthcare protocols.
Right.
Okay.
Wonderful.
So-
Good. All
All right. So
Next.
let's move on to some of the state enactments. All right. The state has been acting through the governor's office, primarily through executive orders. And from the very onslaught of the pandemic, the governor has issued multiple executive orders addressing different levels of the pandemic, addressing who can do what, when it can be done, how it can be done. And so we still have now this is the kind of the last series of executive orders addressing the pandemic on the state level. And the first one I want to talk about is 244. 244 is very interesting because it did two things for us. First of all, it terminated the public health emergency. So the governor, through this enactment, declared that there was no longer a public health emergency. All right. However, it kept in place the state of emergency. All right. And that's very significant because the state of emergency still gives the state government tremendous power to act. So while the governor said we no longer have a public health emergency, we do still have a state of emergency. So all of the extraordinary powers that the governor and the administrative branch of government can utilize during a state of emergency are still in play, even though we don't have the actual public health emergency. All right. Okay. So with that, simultaneously with this executive order, the governor signed a piece of legislation that is really it's the guidepost for New Jersey's post state of emergency actions. Right. It's and that sets forth the actual power and authority left in the state agencies through the state of emergency and what they can and cannot do, and also keeps in place the vestiges of a few of the prior executive orders, many of which have now been overridden by executive order number 244.
Right.
The most significant one of those that still remains in effect, vestiges of it, is what we refer to as executive order 192. Now, I don't have it referenced here, but I do want to talk about it. 192 was put in place by the governor, and that dictated, it was put in place by the governor at the time that most businesses were allowed to reopen,
right, and
bring their workforces back. So what the governor did at that time is he issued an executive order which mandated how you were supposed to conduct your back to work protocols, what they were supposed to do. And it dealt with, screening, physical distancing, sanitizing, all the things that the CDC was preaching to us since the onset of the pandemic. All right. So Executive Order 244 keeps in place Executive Order 192 through the end of this year. Okay. However, the caveat is that it cannot be any more restrictive than what the CDC is currently recommending. So put it all into English for everyone. Okay. If you're operating a workplace, you still have to be sensitive to what the CDC is recommending as far as conducting your workplace is still in the midst of this state of emergency. The CDC is still recommending physical distancing, sanitizing, mask wearing if you're unvaccinated. So our government, our state government, is still saying that employers should follow those CDC guidelines as they pertain to how your workforce conducts itself in the state of the emergency. Okay. But 244 otherwise, it terminated the public health emergency related to COVID. Now, since that time, the state has issued, the governor has issued a number of executive orders pursuant to that state of emergency. And I've got them listed here.
Right.
All right, so 251 requires requires masks to be worn in public, private, charter, Renaissance, and parochial schools. All right, and then 252 directed vaccination or testing requirement for workers in healthcare facilities. Then we had 253, which required vaccination or testing for school and state workers. And then 264 required vaccination and testing for childcare center personnel. Now, 251, okay, and 253 have been the subject of much debate, discussion,
Right.
and and disagreement as it relates to the operations of the schools. There are, and we've seen this play out not only in New Jersey but in other states. Parents are pitted against school boards. Teachers are pitted against the teachers union. Parents are pitted against the teachers union. So it's become just a political hot potato as to these standards or requirements that have been posed on the school system and the children as well as the teachers. Notwithstanding, the requirements are in place, and schools are currently operating under these standards, as are the child care centers and the healthcare centers, the healthcare facilities.
So Joseph, I have to let you know. So I'm president of the New Brunswick Board of Education.
Oh, are you really? Okay.
And early on, the governor had done the order like that week. And so I didn't wear my mask for, and I was socially distanced. And so there's someone from the community called the Attorney General's office. And so they went to the prosecutor and gave me a warning that don't do that again. Wear that mask as you, even though the governor can do that. So what, and so the inconsistency. So it actually was on the news and all this stuff. And so, that's where these rules go crazy. It's like, have some common sense in there. You can't, there are certain things that make sense.
Well, and there's certainly been a fair share of hypocrisy all around,
Yeah.
And I say hypocrisy. I don't mean to be disparaging in that sense, but I mean, there's plenty of examples of folks that should be following these guidelines that aren't following the guidelines.
Right.
So they're there for a reason, and if they're put in place, then we should follow them. I mean, there's time for debate and discussion, but an executive order is an executive order. It has the full weight and effect of law.
Yeah.
So and the governor under a state of emergency has the authority to issue the executive orders, and has the authority to make sure that they're enforced.
Yeah.
So it's not a question of whether you like it or don't like it. It's the law. So, but as I said, those two, particularly as it relates to the schools, have just been fraught with controversy and, and dissension and discussion and debate. So, but I mean, the schools seem to be operating, as far as I can tell. Dale, have you noticed any, everything seems to be going well.
Well, it's going, yeah. There are all sorts of, being involved with schools. There are more fights than there ever have been. There are emotional issues coming from this. It really is a tough time. It's really a tough time in schools with the residue of, and it's not just these mandates. It's just the residue of the trauma of the pandemic and being at home. It's really tough, especially in urban areas. Right. People don't realize how challenging a time it is for young people, for teachers, for parents, so. Good. What else do you have?
Okay, so then the last executive order we want to talk about is 271. This was issued just recently, and this impacts those who contract with the state government. This was put into place October 20th of 2021, and it requires that all New Jersey state contractors mandate vaccination or weekly COVID-19 testing for their employees. So it covers all employees of contractors who enter, work at, or provide services in any place in which any state department or agency conducts business or is within the department or agency's control. So this has rather far-reaching consequences as well, because essentially what it says is anybody who does any business with the government, with the state government at all, has to, as part of its contract, mandate that their employees be vaccinated or tested.
Hmm.
So this is the governor's way of really extending his reach beyond the executive branch, which he obviously has control over, including the
Right.
schools and the operation of the schools, because they fall under the Department of Education. But this actually goes beyond the executive branch, and the tentacles reach out into the private sector, because there are thousands of private sector entities that do work with the state government. And all of those entities now, as a condition of having a contract, either renewed or currently, need to have the vaccination and testing requirements in place. So this is, like I said, it's a rather far-reaching executive order and has consequences far beyond the executive branch of the government. So
I mentioned this, but this one, because I actually had written a draft executive order, gave it to the governor's chief of staff about requiring public agencies receive state money to list on their website how much they spend with veteran, women, and minority certified businesses. And they can't seem to get that executive order because, again, when you talk about small businesses who have been excluded from this, but they have this wide-ranging executive order that it's used for some things and not others. And so
no, you're right. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. This affects indiscriminately, all employers, whether they're the ones that you're trying to get the executive order
big or small,
or the largest employers in the state. If you contract with the state government in any way whatsoever, then you're subject to this executive order. So, which just highlights the scope of it and the reach. So I mean, that's kind of it. That's in a nutshell. That's where we're at right now as it relates to compliance and policy protocols as it relates to COVID. Private sector employees, just to sum up, private sector employers, unless you're doing government, and I should also note that the federal government has a similar executive order in place for those that do business with the federal government.
right.
Okay, so if you're a private employer, unless you're doing business with the state or federal government, you're currently under no obligation or no special guidelines other than to be sensitive to the CDC guidelines as it relates to your workplace environment.
Yep.
Right? The CDC still recommends that you physical distance, that you require masks for unvaccinated folks, you sanitize, you use barriers if you need to between employees that can't physical distance. Those things you should still be sensitive to and make an effort to keep your workplace safe. Beyond that, if you're a private employer, until we know what the what the status is of the OSHA's ETS that's now in the courts and has been enjoined, until we know what the status of that is, you're under no mandatory obligation to do anything any longer.
Okay. So Joseph, what we've talked about employers and employees. Now, what about customers? What can employers what can retail outlets demand of customers, if anything?
Well, retail outlets also have the flexibility to impose. I mean, let's put it this way. So they have the same rights to impose the maximum protection that an employer has. Right. So a retail outlet, a restaurant, right, can require you to be vaccinated to come in for business. All right. They can require you to wear a mask.
Right.
Right. Now, obviously, when you're talking about a retail outlet and whether I can go into store A, which requires me to be vaccinated and wear a mask, versus going into the competitor across the street who doesn't require that.
Right.
That type of dilemma puts retailers in a tougher spot.
Right.
So it's harder for retailers to impose the maximum protections unless everybody does it.
Right.
Because otherwise you'll just be selling out to your competition.
Right. Exactly.
Now, as far as again, employers are concerned, anybody that enters your place of employment can be subject to the same restrictions or requirements that you impose on your employees,
Okay.
or worse. Okay, you can require anybody that comes into your building, even if they're not your employees. If you don't require your employees to show proof of vaccination, you can certainly require vendors, visitors, customers, whoever else comes into your place of business
Right.
to do that.
Right.
All right. It's a little easier sell, like I said, for people walking into an office building to go to somebody's office versus going into the local retail shop, because unless all the retailers are imposing it, you're gonna put yourself out of business.
Yeah, and so we have, a watcher who, as a lot of folks, who are anti-mandates. They're not anti-vax, they're anti-mandates.
Right.
And so they're, as you said, they support businesses that don't have those mandates. Let me ask you, I don't know, and I didn't ask you before, if you have, we're starting to now look at this marijuana legislation. Have you done any research on some of the labor requirements for marijuana yet, or are they all new?
Yeah, no, we started to get into the marijuana regulations and the impact of that in the workplace when the medicinal marijuana came out, because that created an entire set of issues and concerns for employers and how you deal with that. It's only going to be made more complicated by the recreational marijuana.
Right.
And yeah, there are most employers before even the medicinal marijuana used to test for marijuana. If they did drug testing, they tested for marijuana and would use the use of marijuana as a basis to exclude you from employment.
Right.
But since the advent of medicinal marijuana and now recreational marijuana, a lot of employers have decided to take that off their screening process altogether, because the issues are so complex and difficult to deal with. Because marijuana is not something that you can immediately test for. Right. It can be in your system for up to 30 days. And so if you capture someone, with even if you prohibit marijuana in the workplace, which the law allows you to do, even if you have a medicinal card, all right, you can prohibit use of marijuana in the workplace. So if someone gets caught up in a random drug test because they are maybe a DOT driver or something like that, if they get caught up in a random drug test and they pop positive for marijuana, all right, there's no way of knowing whether they just smoked a joint during lunch break, right, or they smoked a week ago when they were when they weren't feeling well. Okay, and in order the protocol that the statutes and the regulations require you to follow in order to drill down and make a determination as to whether that person is currently under the influence are just they're extraordinarily complex.
Interesting. So Lisa, a frequent watcher, Lisa, how you doing? Lisa Chowansky has a great question. I'm concerned as an employer of union employees, approximately 50, that I am liable because although I didn't implement a vaccine policy, many of my customers did, and they would not allow for religious exemption or weekly testing. So many of my employees went and got vaccinated to save their jobs with those customers. What do you think the liability could potentially be in this case?
Okay, can you repeat that again for me, please?
Yeah, and if you can see it, if you go to the Q&A, if you click on that Q&A, you can read it
there it is.
for yourself. Yeah.
All right, I'm concerned as an employer of union employees, they am liable because although I did not implement vaccine policy, many of my customers did, and they would not allow for religious exemption or work conditions to the jobs with those customers. So I'm trying to figure out the flow here. So you are the employer of union employees. And am I understanding correct? Your employees go out into customers' locations, if that's what I'm understanding?
Yeah, that's how I'm reading it too, that they actually go to customers who don't allow religious exemption.
Okay. So, and then the question is, what do you think the liability will be in that case? Well, I'm not sure whose liability we're looking at here, but let's, so you don't have a policy that mandates vaccines. Your customers do. So
Yep.
in order for your employees to enter the customer's location, they have to be vaccinated. Is there liability there? Well, there could be liability against your customers to the extent that they're precluding your employees from entering because they're not vaccinated but they have a religious exemption.
Right.
All right. So from that standpoint, yes, I mean, if it results in loss of business to you, or if it results in, loss of employment opportunity for your worker, either of you could potentially have a claim against that customer for failing to at least have a process in place to vet someone who says they have a religious exemption or a medical exemption. Okay.
Right.
So yeah, there could be liability there for sure.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I obviously I'm not a lawyer, but my guess is, I think the government mandates will hold up, but I think you're right that the religious and medical exemptions, if anyone is ignoring those, that there's real liability there.
No, I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
And I can't, I can't emphasize enough that, I hear the discussions and you don't always hear folks paying enough, enough attention to those exemptions. They're really important. They're established by law. And you do have, as an employer, you have the right to vet them and make sure that they're legitimate, that it's a bona fide religious belief, and
Right. Yeah.
right. But you do have to go through the process. You got to go through the protocol.
Yeah.
It does have to be vetted, and you have to give the employee an opportunity to establish that they have a basis for the exemption.
Yeah. This is Joseph. This has been great on the pandemic stuff, and there's more to follow. I mean, so many things seem to be changing, weekly.
Weekly it changes.
Yeah.
So and it's going to stay like that, Dale, until we get to that new normal.
Yeah.
Whatever that is, and then whatever the level of new normal is, that hopefully is what's going to take us into the future, so we can stop having the need for these kind of things where we're kind of updating what's going on, what's happening, all these moving pieces. So and look, I think I think we're almost there. I think although there's a higher incidence of breakthroughs than I think anybody would like, it seems like the breakthrough cases are not quite as severe. If we can still encourage people to get the vaccine or to get their booster shots, I think we should be okay. So we'll see.
Well, I think the curveball in all of this, and it really hit home yesterday. I was talking to a woman who's an expert in marijuana and the cannabis industry and the physical. She has some medical background, the physical, right. And really the same thing here is I think the elephant in the room is DNA, because I think the reality is that they're 90-year-olds that survived this. I know someone who was in their 20s who died from the pen.
I think you're absolutely right.
And the woman who I was talking to about cannabis, because we're looking at cannabis entrepreneurship and what does that mean and what are the ethical and moral and financial implications of that. And she was saying that everybody has cannabinoids in them, and everyone just responds differently to marijuana. And so it's completely different. I mean, and your dosage and everything. And so this whole mandate of one thing for everybody is, I think it's going to go away the dodo bird as we get DNA. I don't know what you think.
No, I happen to agree with you. I think everyone's, DNA makeup puts them in a different position for whether, for how, if, whether, and, they can deal with whatever it may be, COVID or, I mean, it's the same thing with flus and the common cold. Yeah. I mean, there are folks that are so susceptible to flu, they get it every year. And there are other folks that never get a flu shot and haven't had the flu their entire life. So, I think a lot of it goes back to DNA. I think you're absolutely right.
And the problem is that the people that want to divide take that one story and say, well, someone got vaccinated and they died, or someone died because they weren't vaccinated, and they use that for their own political. And that's why we're such a divide. People are using both sides to
I absolutely agree with it. It's like let me find the evidence to support my case, and then and ignore the other side and just run with what works for me, my narrative. No, you're absolutely right. And I don't know if we'll ever get beyond that. Hopefully we will, and start to look at these things holistically, as opposed to in what slice, works for me versus what slice works for you.
Right.
Because the only way we're ever going to deal with stuff like this in the future and hope to avoid it is if we take a holistic approach.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. The other employer issues. We have a number of employers on the call today, and many will watch this video. What are you coming across, or what are some of the challenges you've seen, even above pandemic stuff?
I'll tell you what was incredibly hot, if you will, before the pandemic hit was wage and hour issues.
Oh, really?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Misuse of independent contractors, misuse of the exemptions, not paying people overtime because you think that they're exempt. A lot of people are under the misconception that just because you pay somebody by salary, that they are then exempt from overtime.
Right.
And that's not the case. The only thing that exempts a person from overtime is whether they meet one of the specific exemptions. And all of those exemptions have what they call a duties test.
Right.
And it's not unless the person is actually performing those duties can they meet one of those exemptions. And it's probably one of the most misunderstood aspects of employment law,
Right.
and misapplied. And in the last several years, the respective Department of Labors, both at the federal and state level, have gotten much more aggressive in addressing these wage and hour violations. So now that has kind of waned as the pandemic has taken over, and the state and federal regulatory agencies were effectively not even operating for the most part.
Right.
So, but I fully expect as we, again, get to that level of normalcy, where the new normalcy, and we're seeing now the regulatory bodies are beginning to reactivate and get back into the flow of things. I fully expect we're going to see a lot of wage and hour stuff heat up again. So,
but this is a really important thing, because especially as we work with entrepreneurs, the gig economy is very real, and the gig economy is getting even more real, even bigger. And I think not everybody wants to. I think sometimes government gets in the way and says, "Oh, well, you should have paid this person," but they said, "No, I don't want it. I want a W-9. I don't want to. I don't want that extra money. I'm not doing this. If I want extra money, I'd hire. They wanted to hire me full time. I don't want to. I want to work as a contractor." And so maybe there's a form, maybe there's a legal, and this is maybe a way you can create a legal form where you sign away the right to have them pay salary.
Right. Now, that's a great point. All right. But, and I deal with this with clients all the time. All right. The wage and hour laws have provisions in them which specifically say any agreement that an employee signs where they're waiving their rights under the wage and hour laws is unenforceable. So as an employee, if I am a W-2 employee, and I'm entitled to overtime, I can't agree not to be paid overtime.
Really? And what's the logic? What's the legal logic behind that?
Because the logic is that employees will agree to give up their rights because of whatever, employer pressure or employee preference. Look, I fully agree with you. I think the wage and hour laws, similar to a number of laws in this country, but in particular the wage and hour laws, they're antiquated. Let's remember where those laws first came in. The FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act came into effect in 1933. All right, and so it was with the great, when we were just coming out of the Depression. FDR did all that legislation, and it was intended to protect workers in factories. Okay, manufacturing people. You go in the morning, you punch the clock in, you punch out at lunch, you punch in from lunch, and you punch when you go home. That was the mentality. And to this day, the Department of Labor, if it comes into your business to do an audit, that's their mentality. That's what they want to see. Even if you have employees that don't follow that protocol. All right. So you're 100% right. We've got to modernize our view of work.
Yeah, yeah.
And how it's performed, where it's performed, and when it's performed, and who's performing it. All right.
But I think, you can, they should allow the courts to, if in fact an employer is abusive and forcing people to sign this, you should be able to prove that, but if it's a one-off gig economy and I say, hey, I want to work for 10 different employers. So I just want, I want my, W-9 and I don't want a W-2, and I feel this too. I was president of Crossroads Theater Company when the year we won the Tony Award for the best regional theater. And we had contract, actors and actresses. And then the Department of Labor came in and said, oh, they should have been employees, even though they were there for like 3 months.
Absolutely.
And it's crazy. I mean, that, and then we fought it for a while, ended up winning, but these guys are, it's almost like, the folks that go to home to take children out, it's really,
I work for just quick story, war story. I have a client that I represent that's a staffing company. They place nurses into hospitals. And so they hired a nurse who came in as an independent contractor. She had her own employer identification number. She insisted that she wanted to be W-9. She insisted she wanted to be paid by 1099. And the employer agreed and even treated her as an independent contractor to the extent that they allowed her to kind of make her own hours and, work things out with the hospital on her own. Anyway, make a long story short, she just turned around and has sued my client now, claiming that should have been paid as a W-2 and therefore is owed, a tremendous amount of overtime that she didn't get paid. All right. It's likely to, if it doesn't settle, it will become a class action suit.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Which means that any of his, 1,000 or so nurses that he's placed over the years can now, who were in the same boat, can come back now and claim that they should have been paid overtime.
Wow.
Because again, any agreement that you make with your employer, right, where you're forfeiting your rights under the wage and hour laws is unenforceable.
Wow, interesting. The now, what if you finally we're almost near time, but if you have someone come in and help you out for something, and they come every week to help clean your house or do something, and you're not hiring them, but you give them a tip. Is that a violation of because I mean the old Manny law where they were legal and
right?
Is that a violation?
Well, look again. If you're and a lot of folks have gotten into that. They got into trouble with those type of relationships.
A lot of politicians.
If you're if you're engaging someone to perform services for you, all right. If they're not employed by you, then that's one thing, right? But if arguably they're employed by you, then meaning they're either a housekeeper, a nanny, a gardener, or whatever the case may be, then they've got to be treated like an employee, which means you got to take taxes out, you got to remit the payroll taxes, they're entitled to overtime. So, that you could be in trouble there. Even if somebody comes to you and performs services for you, it's not as likely to happen with just a one-off situation where somebody comes in, you pay them a few dollars to do something. But if you have that regular history of somebody coming, on a regular basis, even if it's once a week, they could claim they're employed by you.
Right. And so the bottom line is that it's not a problem until it is a problem. So
Correct.
It's nothing's a problem until somebody complains about it.
I tell people that all the time. It's not a problem.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a problem until it is a problem. So, hey, Joseph, these things go quickly. This is really, really good. Really, a lot of good information. Just want to thank you so much, and thank you all for listening. We got some good questions, and to be continued. We'll probably have you on again because things.
Yeah, actually, if you'd like to do a future program on wage and hour issues, I think that might be informative.
Yeah. Now, also, so I do 2 shows. One with RV and television. One's Entrepreneur State of Mind. The other is Family Business World. And so we definitely want to book you for one of those.
Please do. I'd be more than happy to. Yeah, that'd be great.
And yes, well, again, Joseph, thank you very much. And thank everybody for watching.
Folks. All right. Have a great weekend, everyone, and have a happy Thanksgiving to you all.
Happy Thanksgiving. Yep. A wonderful weekend. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank
Good
you, sir.
stuff. Good information. Take care.
All right. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.